Hi, my name is Karina Akidal. I'm the managing editor of Canadian Auto Dealer. I'm here with Brian Murphy from Canadian Black Book. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the taxes sort of baked into the NAFTA agreement that could impact used vehicle imports coming in from Canada to the U.S. and vice versa. So, Brian, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what that situation is and clarify any misunderstandings there might be out there.
Yeah, sure, Karina. Nice to see you again, and nice to be back on video. Um, yeah, the July 1st implementation date for the USMCA trade agreement, I think it snuck up on everybody quite quickly, given everything else that was going on in the industry. But that's now pressed into law. So essentially, we had a free trade agreement that was some 26 years old, and now we have a whole new set of rules for the game of exporting vehicles across the border, whether it's Canada, United States, or United States to Canada. So, the bottom line is that vehicles that were not manufactured in the US or don't meet US content rules can be taxed 2.5% unless they can prove that they're exempt under the USMCA agreement. And then light trucks, pickup trucks, or vans that have just two seats in them, they're subject to a really old rule of taxation called the chicken tax. I promise you that's really what it's called. There's a long story as to why it's called chicken tax, but they can be taxed 25%. So that's a massive tax. Yeah, so that's kind of the environment we're operating in now after July 1st. I mean, those taxes were sort of on the table before, but what was different was under the NAFTA agreement, you could get a certificate of compliance that would allow the vehicle to cross the border without paying any tariffs, and now those are no longer valid anymore. So the whole process starts anew again, just on Canada Day.
And so a couple of questions to follow up on that. One, if those taxes were, I guess, really imposed, how would that affect dealers in the US, and how would that affect dealers in Canada?
Yeah, I think, well, the pickup trucks are the most severe example of an impact. That if you were a dealer in Canada purchasing vehicles at auction or taking trades and then exporting them to the US, that any vehicles that were made that were not made in the US, so they were made, any pickup trucks that were made in Canada or made in Mexico, you would be very unlikely to export those to the US, because by the time you paid a 25% tariff, it probably doesn't make business sense anymore at all to ship that vehicle. And then on the positive side of things, though, is that one of the frustrations for Canadian dealers at auction looking to buy vehicles has been, over the last decade almost now, is that they're often outbid by bidders who want to buy the vehicles and ship them to the US. So some of those vehicles that are not as attractive to export anymore, so a Canadian-built pickup truck or a Mexican-built pickup truck, for example, they would be, they probably wouldn't get outbid by somebody looking to ship that vehicle. So there's a good opportunity for them to buy that vehicle and sell it here in Canada. So there's good and bad to this. It's not necessarily all bad.
Now, what I also find interesting is that I understand you mentioned the July 1st Canada Day implementation date of the new NAFTA agreement, so USMCA in the US or CUSMA in Canada. That date was actually meant to be in the fall, and had it remained originally in the fall, would dealers of both sides have had enough time to comply with the changes, or at least in good part?
Yeah, I think maybe what would have happened is there might have been more clarification, say by US Customs, what was actually going to be happening on a day-to-day basis at the border. So there's still some expectation from some of the folks in the industry I've talked to that they think there may be some clarification, that maybe there'll be some grandfathering of vehicles, that they can still freely pass. It's hard to say at this point in time, but what our various sources are telling us that, yeah, as of today, like, if a vehicle wasn't made in the US, it's going to be taxed accordingly. And vehicles made in the US are taken as sort of goods returning back to the country that they were made in, so they're not subject to tax right now. The way the agreement's written, however, though, you could have a vehicle that's made in the US but you may have to prove that it has enough content in it to pass the border freely. So, you know, a lot of it just comes down to how things are going to work at the border on a day-to-day basis, and that those content rules actually get more strict over time as well. Like under NAFTA, it was 62.5% content, and then over time, it's actually going up to 75% in 2023. So even the content rules are shifting. So I think it'll take a while before some of this, you know, becomes clear for everybody. But it definitely seems like more taxes rather than less at the present time.
Okay, well, do you have any more insights or comments about this situation that you'd like to share with dealers?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we're looking at Canadian Black Book, since we, you know, we're looking at forecasting, we forecast residual values for leasing, and then also we publish the guidebook for wholesale values. Is that these vehicles that that we're monitoring, that we know were made in Mexico or made in Canada, especially on the truck side, we're going to watch those values very closely, because you know they may go down disproportionately more than some of the other vehicles that are, you know, some other comparable vehicles. So yeah, so we're keeping an eye on that, because there is a number. There's about 16 products, pickup trucks specifically, that were made in Mexico over the years, and then 5 pickup trucks in Canada. So 5 models. So we're going to be monitoring those more closely, and if we start to see their values go down, that may be the case that they're no longer as attractive for exporting.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview, Brian, as always. And as always, I wish you and your family good health and safety during this difficult period.
Thanks. Same deal. Always good to chat. Take care.